My family and fiancé turned their backs on me after my sister set me up. I need advice because I don't know what to do anymore. I was 21 when my fiancé proposed to me. He was the light of my life. We'd known each other since kindergarten, and our families were incredibly close. Almost every day, either he'd have dinner at our house or I'd eat at his. He didn't have any siblings, but I had two older sisters, which mattered because he was close to them too. We all grew up together. When we started dating, our parents practically threw a weeks-long celebration. He helped me manage my anxiety, and when I gained a little weight and my mom started saying he'd leave me, he put her in her place. He told her he loved me not for my looks, but for who I am, though, in his words, I was still the most beautiful girl in the world to him. We were engaged for just 6 months before everything fell apart. My middle sister, let's call her Nikki, was a very cold person. She never showed emotion. The only person she'd ever open up to was my fiancé because she saw him as a brother. He'd helped her through tough times when she struggled with addiction and legal troubles. We never really got along. I loved her because she was my sister, but as a person, I didn't like her. Out of nowhere, she said she wanted to take me to a club because we'd never gone out together, and she felt bad for always being so distant. I agreed. Clubs aren't really my thing, but after a couple of cocktails, I loosened up and started enjoying myself. Everything was fine until Nikki spotted a guy she liked. She said she wanted to climb him like a tree and went over to him. But a few minutes later, she came back with a sour look on her face. I asked what happened, but she stayed silent. I didn't want her night to be ruined, so I pressed her until she admitted he'd refused to take her number because he wanted mine instead. I told her he was a loser and that there were plenty of guys who'd love to date her, but she just froze. Then she said she needed to use the bathroom and that we'd head home after. I waited for her for over an hour, sipping more cocktails in the meantime. Suddenly, I felt dizzy, so I decided to call a cab and go home. As I was leaving the club, I ran into one of Nikki's friends, someone she'd briefly dated in the past. He asked if I needed help getting to my ride, and I told him I'd called a taxi. He said he was leaving too and offered to share the ride. I agreed. Once we got in the cab, I tried to find my phone in my bag, but the dizziness got worse. After that, I don't remember anything. I woke up the next morning on a hard couch with a pounding headache. When I came to, I realized I was at that friend's house. My phone was on the glass coffee table in front of me, completely dead. He noticed I was awake and offered me water and some painkillers, explaining that I'd passed out in the taxi. Since he didn't know my parents' address, he brought me to his place and let me sleep on the couch. I told him I needed to get home because my fiancé was probably worried. He called me a cab, and I left. When I got home, my parents, Nikki, my fiancé, and his parents were all standing in the living room. I thought they'd been worried about me, but as soon as I opened my mouth, my fiancé demanded, "How could you do this to me?" I tried to explain that my phone had died, but he started yelling, accusing me of cheating. I was in shock. Why would he think that? I tried to tell them what happened, but they kept interrupting me. Nikki jumped in, claiming I was lying. She asked how I could be so cruel to someone who'd been by my side all these years. She said I'd been flirting with guys all night and then, while she was in the bathroom, left with her friend. I explained what really happened, but Nikki showed them a photo of him putting his hand on my back as we left the club. Yes, the picture looked bad, and I was so drunk I hadn't even noticed his gesture. My fiancé got even angrier. His mom and mine started crying. I begged Nikki to call her friend to confirm nothing happened, but when she did, he told a completely different story, that I'd asked him to take me to his place and that we'd slept together multiple times. I started screaming at Nikki because I realized she'd set me up to frame me. I pleaded with my fiancé to believe me, but he just shook his head and walked out. After everyone left, my mom slapped me and told me to get out of the house. I went to a friend's place and stayed there for a few days. All that time, I texted and called my fiancé, begging him to listen and believe me that nothing happened, but he never responded. Then I got a message from my mom saying she was kicking me out for good. She called me a bunch of awful names I don't even want to repeat. She didn't even let me pack my things, just threw them out. I was homeless. No one in my family would help me. They all sided with my fiancé and my mom. In just a day and a half, My life was destroyed because of Nikki's lies. For weeks, I tried to win back my family and fiancé. The final straw came at Christmas. By then, I was crashing on friends' couches, drifting from place to place. On Christmas Eve, I went to my mom's house, hoping to reconcile. I knocked, but no one answered. Then a friend called me and said she'd just seen photos on Facebook of my family celebrating Christmas out of state. There they were, my parents, sisters, grandparents, even my ex-fiancé and his family. When I saw those pictures, I broke down. They looked so happy, like I'd never even existed. I cried for days, then blocked them all and returned the engagement ring. A friend knew someone who was hiring at a restaurant in another city a few hours away. He even offered cheap housing above the place for a small fee. It was my chance to start over. It killed me that no one took my side, that no one even tried to hear me out. They just threw me away like trash. I moved quickly and started working. My first place was tiny, and the shifts were nearly 10 hours long, but I began saving money. Now, I don't live in that little apartment anymore. I've rented a nice, spacious one. I still work at the same restaurant, but I've moved up to assistant manager. It had been about 2 years since I last spoke to anyone in my family or knew anything about them. Then one day there was a knock at my door. It was my ex-fiancé. I froze. Everything I'd buried deep inside came rushing back. For a split second, I wanted to throw myself into his arms, but then the pain hit me, and I tried to slam the door shut. He stopped it with his hand and begged me to give him a chance to explain. It turned out Nikki had gotten married and confessed that she'd lied back then. She said she'd met someone she loved with all her heart, and only then did she realize the terrible harm she'd caused. I asked how he found me. He said my friend had told him that my family had been trying to reach me for a while and wanted to see me. I told him I needed time to decide if I wanted him back in my life. He left, and I was left in total turmoil. I know I'll never forgive Nikki, but what about the others? My family and fiancé didn't know she was lying, but I feel like they turned their backs on me too quickly without even letting me explain. I don't know if I should forgive them. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Now, here's an update. I didn't get back together with my ex. I wasn't sure what to do, but soon after, he must have given my phone number to my parents because they texted me, asking to meet. I didn't respond and considered setting up a Zoom call, but that wasn't necessary. My dad showed up at my doorstep. When I opened the door and saw him, I immediately broke down. He insisted on cleaning up after me when I was done crying. We sat down, and I just sobbed uncontrollably. My dad had used the same cologne my whole life, and the smell triggered a flood of memories. He tried to hug me, but I pushed him away and asked what he was doing here. He told me he and my mom were getting divorced. He said he'd begged her to reach out to me after I left, but she refused, saying I was acting like a child. She thought if I chose to abandon them after such an awful act, I should figure things out on my own. I asked him how long it took them to notice I wasn't in town anymore. He said they came back after the New Year's holidays and planned to invite me to talk. That's when they contacted my friend, who told them I'd moved away and no one knew where I was. I asked why he didn't listen to me and why he threw me out of his life so easily. He started crying, saying he never wanted things to turn out this way and that more than anything he wanted to fix it. I reminded him how they fought for Nikki when she was using drugs and dropped out of school. They didn't kick her out. They sent her on a vacation to get her mind off substances. That's where she got hooked on alcohol, and still, they always took her side. He said he had no idea my mom was going to kick me out permanently. He thought it would just be for a couple of days, but then they decided last minute to spend Christmas out of state. According to him, my mom promised that I could come back home after they returned. I told him she'd thrown out all my stuff. He said that wasn't true, my things were still at their house. I asked about Nikki. He said she was dead to him. But my mom was begging him to forgive her because they'd already lost one daughter and couldn't lose another. My dad had blocked both my mom and Nikki and had practically forced my ex to find me. When I heard he'd cut them off completely, I told him not to show up again without my permission. He agreed. He asked what would happen next, but I said I didn't know. I told him he'd hurt me deeply, and I finally let out everything I'd been feeling, how much it hurt to see them happy without me, how hard it was to survive on my own. By the end, we were both crying, but I felt lighter, like a huge weight had lifted off my shoulders. My dad offered to help me find a better apartment and job, but I refused. I told him I wouldn't quit my job because my boss had helped me so much, and I wanted to repay him. I said I didn't want him to do anything for me, but I was willing to try rebuilding our relationship on my terms. I warned him it would take a very, very long time, and I might never fully trust him again. He said he'd do anything to make up for what he'd done. I asked why Nikki did it. He said she thought my ex deserved better and just wanted him to be happy because, in her mind, he sacrificed too much in our relationship. She loved him like a brother and wanted to break our engagement. That night, she'd asked her friend to get me out of the club to take compromising photos and then bring me to his place to make her plan work. In reality, nothing happened, I just passed out on the couch. The guy played video games all night and even has proof. My dad offered to get my stuff from my mom's house and bring it to me, but I said I didn't need it anymore. I asked about Nikki's husband. He said my mom was keeping everything hushed up, but he had the guy's number and wrote it down for me. After my dad left, I decided to call Nikki's husband. I was sweating buckets during the call, nauseous with nerves. What if I heard her voice in the background? As soon as he picked up, I blurted everything out at once, something I regret now. I should have eased him into it. He sounded confused, so I explained it all again, including her addiction and alcoholism. I expected him to yell at me and defend her, but instead, he let out a heavy sigh. Turns out he'd suspected for a while that she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. Nikki had serious issues with his sister, constantly lying about her and driving such a wedge between them that his sister didn't even come to their wedding. I told him I was sorry and that he should reconcile with his sister because the problem was Nikki, not her. We talked a bit more and then he hung up. I don't know what he'll do with that information, but I hope he leaves her. He seems like a genuinely good guy who's already lost his family because of Nikki. I've decided to work on my relationship with my dad. My mom always called the shots in their marriage, so the fact that he's firmly decided to divorce her and cut ties with Nikki shows he's serious about making things right. I don't think I'll ever forgive my mom because she still sees Nikki as a victim in all this, and I'm done listening to her excuses. If she reaches out herself, we'll see, but for now, I don't want to talk to her. As for my ex, we haven't met again. My dad said he wanted to come with him, but Dad talked him out of it, saying it'd be easier for me to decide if I saw them separately. He also mentioned that my ex had been arrested for assaulting Nikki's friend, the one who lied about everything. Someone filed a report, but he was released a few days later. I'll write another update when I get the chance to talk to my ex.